to THA Talks, for free thought and open minds.
And for freedom of speech.
Hello, I'm Paul Obatelli and welcome to another edition of THA Talks, the alternative podcast show from the UK. Our talks include news, conspiracies, spirituality, the occult, science, history, art, philosophy, religion, and much more. If you'd like to check out our full archive, just go to www.thatalks.com to listen to or to download all our free content. And if there's anyone who'd like to contact us and give us some feedback, or maybe you'd like to recommend a guest for the show, you can email us info@thatalks. And don't forget, you can subscribe to the show via our RSS feed, and you can also find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, and many other podcast directories out there. Well, hello everyone, thanks for tuning in again, and I apologise for my long absence. Just been really busy with music and bits and pieces, and that month has just flown past again. So I'm hoping to crack on and do some shows in this coming month. And today we're going to be speaking with a very familiar guest indeed, and about a very fascinating subject of Gnosticism, which is one of those subjects which you can just indulge in. And the guest this week is going to be the very, very familiar Rev David Parry. How you doing, David?
Watch your cock. It's nice to be back.
Well, yeah. It feels strange because you haven't been on the show as much as you used to, so it's kind of, you feel like a proper guest this time as opposed to just a spin-off double host kind of thing.
Oh, thanks. I hope I was a proper guest before.
Well,
places to go, people to see, Obatelli. Places to go, people to see.
Well, you're a guest stroke host stroke whatever, you know.
Well, I'll still help you out with some hosting, but remember, I've got a bit on my plate at the moment.
Oh yeah, and I mean, I was just saying, it's been such a long time since the last show I've done. I haven't been doing as many shows as I liked, but just enough to keep it going, and that's what I intend on doing, because I've still got a lot of guests in the pipeline and stuff, and I've just got to get down and do it. So it will happen. Don't worry, it will get rolling again.
Yeah, this is a good project. I mean, despite our detractors who seem to be growing by the week, this is a very, very good project.
Well, I mean, this is as I said, I've got plenty of talks lined up that I've just got to crack on with. But the reason why this one we're talking today is that subject, Gnosticism again. Now, the thing is with this subject, I think it's a sort of thing that you hear about it, and it's got so many layers of what it's all about. And for our listeners that maybe have not have listened to anything on Gnosticism this time, I guess you could say you could call it the beginning of Christianity, what Christianity started out to be, and what we look back now as Gnostics were actually at the time just other Christians of the time that had grown from this movement. And obviously you can indulge deeper and say, did that exist before? Maybe it's a spirituality that's been on this earth for a long time. It's come from somewhere and it's just manifested in different formats. But, today we are going to be talking about Gnosticism and just really back to the nitty gritty of what it is all about. And I guess how closely you could stand it next to if that's the right phrase, put it next to Christianity today, how much in common it's got with Christianity, I should say. So David, how about we start off with you? How relevant is Gnosticism today, and how do you see that relevance?
Oh my God. I mean, this is not an age of faith. This is an age of knowledge. Therefore, Gnosticism is coming back with force and power because it suits the age. I mean, Christianity has the distinct honor of having cut out its own brain very early on in its history, by which I mean the Gnostics. That was the thinking part, the Sangha. the monks, the priests, the nuns who were devoted to knowledge and high states of consciousness, meditational practice, magic, and so on. I mean, I'm a bishop of the Valentinian Church, which certainly is very clearly Christian. If you'd have asked Valentinus, what are you? He'd have said Catholic. He wouldn't have said Gnostic. I mean, nowadays people forget that the word Gnostic really was used by the enemies of these people to say you're not really us. And it includes everybody. I mean, even the Manichaeis. If you'd have asked Mani, the prophet, he'd have probably said, I'm a Christian. But I think I overall agree with you. I mean, it's a seminal practice. It's a seminal pursuit in the human condition itself. Faith, excuse me, is very, very, very important. But people want to know things. They want to know about higher worlds, higher realms. And faith is good. I mean, we all need faith in each other to get society functioning. But, it can't be enough, I would say, to really lead a fulfilling spiritual life. You need to go to the step beyond, which is Gnosticism. And Gnosticism in all of its flowerings. I think it's true Christianity. I agree with you on that. It tends to be the step above. And I noticed all the Gnostics tend to agree about what you find in the step above, which is incredibly interesting. I mean, to give something of my own background to maybe help contextualize for listeners. When I was a Callow youth, which of course wasn't yesterday, I'm the first to admit it, Gnosticism was actually the first thing I was looking for. When the anthropologist was another Callow youth, Richard Rudgley, and we both lived in Hampshire. I mean, he tended to be interested in the darker arts in those days, but with me it was always very firmly Gnosticism. My new book is about Gnosticism. But it's not an easy thing to find, and when you do find it, it's sort of rather mind-blowing material. So it's taken me a long time and a great deal of faith and trust in the people I'm working with who managed to convince me this was actually Valentinianism. I was consecrated as a priest and bishop in a monastery in Italy a couple of years ago. So it's not lightweight stuff. And when they managed to convince me this actually was the real deal, and my searches were getting somewhere. I mean, what was my first reaction? I mean, for years I was a Unitarian minister. I can see nothing but an extension of that, a deepening of that. So for me, it's the one pursuit. And Gnosticism's of the time, it's of the age, and I think it deserves a fresh hearing, particularly in Christian circles.
Okay, well, we could go on about how we could link it to other pagan faiths like the Celts and the Norse religions and stuff. We're not going to go there today, but obviously it can, because it's a mysticism that could have overlapped into a lot of different areas many years before, or even as far back as we could possibly go back. We're going to stay on the Christian roots of it this time. And just to clarify for any listeners, I mean, the main difference is, with who we see as Gnostics and Christians today is like you have Jesus Christ. Now the Christians believe that Jesus Christ was a real person who lived, died on the cross for us to save our sins, where the Gnostics would have believed, no, we don't believe that Jesus was a flesh and blood human being, but he was a spirit who came to us in whether it was meditation or certain states of mind to teach us knowledge, and then the priests transferred that knowledge. And then there's the other difference where the Gnostics believe, that Christians believe that the God of the Old Testament and the New Testament is ultimately the same God with a different kind of an evolving message, whereas the Gnostics actually believe that the God of the Old Testament, some would say, was evil and created this world in error by mistake. Some would not go that extreme, say, well, he's not evil, but he's a different God that was an error and made a mistake creating this earth. So that seems to be the fundamental differences between Christianity and Gnosticism. Is that right, or have I missed anything with that?
Yeah, you're speaking very, very well. The Gnostic Christ Jesus isn't necessarily the mainstream Jesus Christ. And there are very important differences in the arguments the Gnostics give as different groups to the mainstream. But if you look back at the first century Christianity, I mean, it was lots of different things. It was the New Age of its day, at the risk of getting into serious trouble. And Gnostic church assemblies would have had a priest at the front, maybe reading, some verses from Scripture, and then, I can easily envisage, and it's been documented, that the congregation would have then meditated on the verses. Because no one has the right to tell you what you're going to find in deep states of meditation. But they were trained professionals leading you into those higher states. Therefore, there was a true vocation at work. Certainly, there's nothing new in Gnostic circles about talking about different layers, dimensions, realities. I mean, we tend to talk about lots of different time spaces. That's a very old idea with us. I remember this young Obertelli telling me once the demiurge was a bastard and we ought to go and fuck him up.
I get that feeling sometimes.
Well, I mean, no, it was a good thing to say, actually. I mean, my point, you hit the point there. He's not really bad in the sense that people have come to understand. Yildabaoth, the blind god, Gnosis is the light, but he cannot see the light.
And just to clarify, this is the God of the Old Testament. These are different names that the Gnostics created for the God of the Old Testament, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's very, very unclear in the different schools how they thought Jesus was related to that particular persona. I mean, lots of the Gnostics would have said he's not. And some of the Gnostics said, he's an emanation directly of the one, or the pleroma, or the bythos, which is in the pleroma, the deep things beyond all aspects of creation. I mean, every time space, every natural order for a Gnostic is provisional. They come, they go. It's rather like the Buddhist samsara. They're real, but they're not real. They're transitory. They're passing states, not really of illusion, but since they're so transitory, you can compare them to that. All the gods are of this world. Therefore, Gnostics would have felt uncomfortable in thinking about Jesus as a god, which in popular Christianity effectively is. Nowadays in Christianity, he's just a nice guy. Under the humanists, under the pressure of the naturalists, a nice guy. They used to go around saying some nice things, which is fair enough. I mean, we need more of them. But how that's distinct from anybody else, I really don't know. Whereas the other sort of superstitious version round the Christmas table is that he was sort of, God in disguise, doing amazing things. And, but he didn't want you to know that, even though you know that. But for Gnosticism, that was all very, very, simple. I mean, simple fare indeed. And there was a lot more to the Christ figure than that. And some people spoke in terms of pure energy and consciousness. Finding a form, finding flesh, manifesting through it, living through it. I mean, we tended to like those passages in the Scripture which said, if you see the human being Jesus Christ, then you see the Father, which is much more complex and sophisticated than people think, because nobody's actually saying Jesus the man is God, but you are saying, if you look at him and the life he's living, you will see the bythos. And I see echoes everywhere. I mean, I think you're perfectly right. It's in the Northern tradition, which I'm very grateful I explored. It's even in Wicca. His fingerprints are everywhere. The fingerprints of Gnosis are everywhere. Since my seminal tradition is the Christian tradition, which I admit to and I've gone back to, for me, it's safer for the simple reason I know what I'm talking about in depth. I know all the symbolic languages. I know how they fit together. I know who's saying what, why they're saying it. So that for me is a strong starting point. If we're looking, and I don't want to spend too much time on neo-paganism because I think we've done that. Certainly, they're trying to recover a great deal, a lot of which is simply lost, I think, which is a shame. I mean, how do you replace that? I don't know. You need 1,000 years to replace it all. And also so many people are only talking about another type of faith. And Gnostics, by definition, aren't big into faith. You believe whatever you want, matey. Can you go into deep states a meditation inside yourself and verify what you're talking about. For instance, in most of the Gnostic initiations, all this paranormal stuff comes along, and the Gnostics are adamant you keep clear of it. It reminded me when I first realized that of the Tibetan monks who would say, you do deep meditations and all this paranormal and magical stuff starts, but be very, very careful because it will easily lead you off the path because it's so intriguing. So you've got all this stuff going on, which is super normal, which is magical, but hey, you've forgotten the point of what you were doing. And, that message from Gnosticism is very, very important. And of course, you've got some big cultural figures like Carl Jung, who openly investigated Gnosticism and found immense riches for what became his school of psychotherapy, his school of psychology later on. As I say, it's come of age and it's coming back. I have had mixed receptions with my own work. I mean, we're setting up our own chapel, Chapel of Love, on the 29th of next month of June. And we've come as something of a breath of fresh air in Africa. It's only racism that thinks black people don't sort of get it all. Actually, they do. And they were. I don't want to go into this, Paul, but beyond a certain point for reasons of privacy and security.
Yeah.
I'm sure you know what I mean by that.
Oh yeah.
And they were saying to me in various ways, this has come as a breath of fresh air to us. And so we've got 2 churches starting in Kenya. We've got one starting in Tanzania. And they are literally, our African brothers and sisters are lapping this up because they've been brainwashed by the Americans and the type of limiting theology of the Bible Belt, which just wants thoughts in your head and do as you're told. Not people standing on their own 2 feet and thinking, I've got my own culture there as a resource to use. I've got my own history. I've got my country. I've got the people around me. This is starting to get interesting because I can use all those things as points of reference in a much greater metaphysical journey. What do you think of that?
No, very interesting. I mean, with these African churches that you're building, are they also going to be the sort of, I suppose you could call it Christian Gnosticism or pagan Gnosticism? Because does that sound realistic? Can you have the different types of Gnosticism within that regard, like different deities that you introduce into it, or is it all what you'd see as the original substance of Christianity?
I think it's a bit of both. I mean, I'm interested in the original substance of Christianity, and for various reasons, to my lovely brothers and sisters in Africa, we've got to be very careful about what we're saying. Because I don't want them dragged from their homes and I don't want them intimidated, and they've got every right to pursue spirituality as they see fit.
It's almost as like the demiurge, Yalda. How do you pronounce it? I never know how to pronounce it.
Boa.
You say that again?
Yildabaoth.
Yildabaoth is kind of like the deity that is destroying all real spirituality, and that's what he is. It's kind of anchoring us in this 3-dimensional flesh. We're meat robots, nothing more. And there are, you can look at the dogmatic aspects of Islam, the dogmatic aspects of Christianity and Judaism. They all seem to have that similar trait of just fear, imprisonment, not, and the violence is a brilliant way of making people, trapping them in this 3-dimensional. It's what keeps us locked in it. And it's almost like that's what the demiurge is resorting to when people start to rise above that. And Gnosticism, and I suppose this isn't an attack on Christianity, because I'm not implying that all Christians are servants for the demiurge, because I do think that even within mainstream Christianity, there's an angle, there's a mindset you can have towards it that is probably more Gnostic than not, if you know what I mean. There's certainly still a lot there in the Bible that's amazing text to read and stuff, even though it's from a Gnostic's point of view, it's left out a lot of Gospels, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Judas, and all those type of things. So yeah, but I think it's good that I think if Christianity, if it comes back, if it manages to put up a fight and keep itself dominant, which it has been, I think it does need to look at the history of Gnosticism, because you can win arguments if you take that ideology and that philosophical look. You can, in this modern day and age, you can win spiritual arguments, whereas if you're just too locked into the old demiurge mindset of that faith, you lose the arguments. And that, I think that's what's been happening over the last few generations. They've not been winning arguments with people that want to be convinced that they should take that spirituality seriously. Is that fair, do you think?
Oh, I think there's some good things there, Paul. I mean, certainly Valentinianism is directly Christian. I mean, there are arguments about how directly the other types are, and of course there are non-Christian types as well. But certainly Valentinus, who is an extraordinary individual in himself, would have said what he was actually doing was not only building but maintaining the mystery school of St. Paul. Therefore, there was a direct line of transmission back to the original apostles. What my African colleagues are doing, what's pagan, what's Christian, what's pagan, what's Christian. I mean, you know me. Certainly, we're trying to look for the Christian essence, which we believe transcends those fascinating boundaries. But I mean, it's got to be done in a certain way, because in some countries, and I don't want to say names and places, groups like Boko Haram turn up, and they're looking for an excuse for people not conforming to sort of the life they're meant to, and they drag people from their houses and they beat them up and sometimes kill them. So my African friends are being very, very brave indeed. They are openly calling themselves Valentinian churches. Some of them are already holding Sunday Mass. That's the religious side of what we do, not necessarily the mystical and Gnostic side of what we do, which we're still discussing. How can that be done in those circumstances? Certainly us wicked Valentinians in London, in Britain, are very, very worried that they're going to get into trouble unless we stand by them firmly, but at the same time offer sage advice and say, you've got to be careful. We understand your complex situation, and we don't want that happening to you. But, in real terms, Valentinian services on a weekly basis are being held in Kenya now, and that's sort of mind-blowing. If Thomas Amundi and Yiso are listening, or they ever get to listen to this, by the way, my hat is off to you. You are two remarkable individuals. If John, don't want to say the surname, is listening to this or ever listens to this, you are equally remarkable. You are brave, brave, brave men. And the light of Gnosis, the light of genuine spiritual knowledge, is starting to shine in that part of the world. Let's hope we can make it shine here just as brightly.
Well, and if they're listening as well, they're more than welcome to come on the show and talk to us, because that'll be very interesting. So please, obviously, given what we've talked about, it's obviously the ball's very much in their court. But that'll be very interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think to take such an open stance, it's sort of dwarfing, Paul. We struggle with our problems here, and they're real problems, and they're material and they're social. We struggle with our problems. But, what we don't have, at least at the moment, although the way this bloody country's going, I'm sure it's not far down the line, we don't have groups that will turn up at your door and threaten violence or drag you out and murder you.
Yeah.
Which does happen over there. And that's why a lot of these wonderful initiatives are stopped in their tracks. So, all of the people that listen to this show, if you have a good word or a kind thought for these brave men, please, please, please send it into the ether, because they really, really need it.
Yeah, I've always thought that with this whole, I've only recently started to really study Gnosticism. That's why in previous shows I've pretty much just been a listener and just putting it out there. Whereas now I know a little bit more about it, and for me, it seems to be the New Testament and paganism before. Although we've lost so much in paganism, you can't directly study it. But I think it seems to be just this old knowledge that's just it's just manifested in different forms, different modes. Now, I'm not for some of the heathens listening, I'm not talking as, I may sound like a universalist, which I wouldn't. I think the word is more fanatical universalist, because I think universalism is existent in all walks of life. But I'm not speaking from a universalist, ultra inclusive perspective. But I do think, each religion, it has a nature aspect, which is more about a thing, something that's been manifest in this planet, and that is also sacred. But there's always an overhanging spirituality of unity of this one Godhead. Now, I'm not saying we should all directly mimic that one Godhead, because I think if we do that, we sort of we'll have nosebleeds. But I think it's got to be understood. And for me, the pagan side of the pagan aspect is the nature. It's us. It's a part of how we were created here on this planet, and the flower that we are. But it's missing the roots of that divine, overhanging, universal oneness that obviously has to create everything. Nothing just created us and everything else just popped up on its own, did it? Even if it's different forms of indigenous faiths, and which most pagan faiths are, they all got created, didn't they? So something created them, and there's obviously differences as well. So I think it's a case of that's about having balance. But that's what I've always believed. It's all manifestations from this same knowledge that's manifested in different guises with different groups of people, different times. And Christianity is the most recent form from New Testament and all the Gospels. But another thing I wanted to touch on, David, is that obviously feminism is politically rampant at the moment, and I've made no secret of my critique of political feminism, but I always make the point to say I think political feminism and spiritual feminism are two very different things. I think political feminism is kind of like a crypto communism that I'm certainly not for, and I don't regard that as the only word for egalitarianism. But I think spiritual feminism is something entirely different, and it's come to us really because the masculine side of spirituality it's oppressed a lot, but it's also, I wouldn't say it's oppressed the female, but it's certainly hidden the divine part of it in spirituality, made it a cult, made it secretive. And where does this lie with Gnosticism? Because I know there's a lot of women that embrace it because the Gnostics were slightly more female inclusive in their practice. But in some study I've done, it was still quite patriarchal and stuff. So let's talk about that a little bit and the relevance of the female.
Well, I mean, whether modern people like it or not, there is something called history, and way back when they were patriarchal societies. I mean, were there matriarchal societies before that? I think it must be a big question mark, a big maybe. And if you're looking at the resources, the documents, the artifacts, the art of the ancient world, does one find maternal mother goddess everywhere? Well, actually, no. I mean, you find a warrior goddess, curiously, but you don't really find the mother that's talked about nowadays. And I'm not saying that's good, actually. I think that sends out mixed signals. So was there a clear matriarchy? I doubt it, because it was too long ago. Was there a clear patriarchy that may have replaced something along those lines? Yes. Were men repressing women? I don't think there's any doubt to that. So it's really important. I mean, they are 50% of the human race. It's really important that stops. I mean, I'm a real egalitarian. I'm not a feminist. At the end of the day, feminism must talk about some type of ascendancy over men, I think. No, I mean, for me, that's immature. It's kid stuff. We're equal. We're both, children of the cosmos. We're all children of the cosmos. One is not better than the other. And vive la différence. I like there being. I mean, as people know, I'm gay. But I like there being ascribed gender roles. I don't want this.
You're not the only gay in the village, though. You're not the only gay in the village, though.
Well, yeah, I'm not the only gay in the village. I don't like this social and sexual chaos that's breaking out at the minute. Has anybody benefited by the recent so-called innovations around us? No. I mean, in those days, back in the day, that ages me, doesn't it? What were we all fighting for in the 70s? Equality before the law. I spoke to a very prominent feminist who remains a friend of mine privately a couple of weeks ago, who said, do you know what they're fighting for now? And I had to say, no, I don't. It's a mystery to the old guard about what's going on. And it seems to me that what they're trying to do, these very unsettled individuals is actually attack the existential basis of things, which can't lead to any good. I mean, why can't we all just get on together? Why can't we all respect each other? Why can't we find the good in each other and do that as opposed to all this endless social engineering and political tinkering? I just don't understand that.
Yeah.
So, well, that's the libertarian me speaking, I suppose. So, yeah, I mean, certainly if we're looking at Valentinian Gnosticism, this all mysterious mythos, a divine principle, the godhead of all the godheads. I mean, none of these epithets apply because it simply can't be discussed. It does whatever it does behind every universe, behind every time space, behind every world, behind every galaxy. It is what it is, the divine thing. It cannot be discussed. It can only make itself known by the fact one of its attributes is overflow, the divine abundance, and therefore it creates abundantly. Certainly in Valentinian mysticism, where I'm on slightly more confident ground, although I've always had an obsession, curiously, with the Manichaeis, and I'll maybe talk about that in a minute. This divine essence, this divine substance, overflows into many different levels of creation, many different dimensions, many different strata of what we would call the real, and it generates complementary opposites of male and female gods, energies, archetypes, some of which live on a completely celestial, divine level. It's mythology; it mustn't be taken seriously, but it's saying something very serious. And it almost it's like the sort of Jewish, Kabbalistic lightning flash. It goes down the different levels of creation in the form of generated male and female complementary opposites until you get to what they would regard as the more material levels, which is where the whole process stops. At that point, you end up with what could be described as the lowest of the archons, Sophia, Mother Nature, the goddess, who is in, I don't remember, it's mythology, it's not meant to be taken seriously, who wants to do what the Bythos is doing, but she is not the Bythos, only the Bythos is the Bythos, and accidentally gets accidentally gets absorbed by her own creation, which is what we would call the natural cosmos. Therefore, she's the lowest in the sense that she's probably the last emanation, but she's not lowest in the sense that she's beneath, because everything is ultimately on that one level, the one reality, the one life, the one divine impulse, and everything is that, albeit in a slightly different expression, but still that. Therefore, we would say, is nature divine? Absolutely. And it's got a divine identity running all the way through it, but that needs liberation as much as we do ourselves. It's an accident. It's something that went wrong. It's not something that should have occurred. And we should be more mindful of our stewardship and who is our mother. Of course, the Catholics get that through the Virgin Mary. Who is our mother and the responsibilities we have to her. I mean, ironically, for a completely transcendentalist movement, we're very, very eco-friendly. And certainly in Valentinism, arguably, don't all jump on me, arguably, there were certainly women deacons. I'm of the school that believes there were women priests. I'd say there were gay and lesbian priests, but of course those categories didn't exist in the ancient world. Therefore, nobody would have known what you were talking about. That's your own personal business. That's your own preference. Shut up. Oh God, if only that would come back, Paul. Something sane and sensible. Wouldn't that be nice? Yeah. But so those categories didn't exist. So people of all different sorts would have been priests or laity, and the idea behind Gnostic priesthood was to develop as far as they could the abilities of the laity. I mean, something that worries me about British Gnosticism, so-called nowadays, is it's full of armchair mystics. It's full of people that like a good rant on Facebook at the weekend. They do sod all, apart from the fact they're quick to criticise and thereby hangs a tail. they're not doing anything, but that's not what the Gnostics were doing. Somebody said to a post I put up on the social media a good couple of months ago, I don't have rules, I'm a Gnostic. Well, that will get us all forward, love. That will really help everything. Thank you for that completely pointless, self-obsessive remark. I hope it's made your day.
Some people think religion is just meant to be ice cream and sweets, isn't it? It's like, oh, this is fun. Yeah. You can just be who you want to be, and I think anything that's worth its salt is you've got to sacrifice a bit for it, and it's not always easy. There's too many people that just, if religion is hard work, if you have to look at yourself and realize there's some things around yourself that's probably not very good and you need to work on, or you need to make certain sacrifices that you don't want to make, then it's oppressive and boring and probably patriarchal, and they don't want to do it. Whereas, if it's fun and bubbly and, this is just like ice cream, then, let's all do it. This is a good hobby. And that's kind of like what a lot of people's, their the way they look at it. But regarding the feminist side of it, I think the thing is, when you're studying these kind of ancient faiths, is you've got to work out what was patriarchal of the time and what was patriarchal philosophically, like theologically. And I think that's the thing is you don't know really whether, okay, so if there wasn't female priests, was it because that was just of the time, or was that this spirituality for some reason doesn't allow it or doesn't think it's right? And I think there's probably a mixture of that. But I think, hey, does it matter as long as women don't feel they're being suppressed within this spirituality, as long as they're feeling spiritually enlightened by it and they can express themselves as people, what does it matter? You're right. Don't touch. It's like anything that's sacred. Leave it for how it is. Of course, we can interpret things differently ourselves personally, but we don't know that, and that's the problem, isn't it? It's what do you include and take out, and think, well, that was just of the time. That's the big argument, isn't it?
Well, I mean, just because they didn't have them then, I think they did personally. I think there's enough evidence to show they were deaconesses. And they may have had priestesses. I think they did. I think the evidence goes in that direction.
The Gospel of Mary in itself, that is a bit of female priesthood, if you like, priestesshood.
That's an absolute bullseye. I mean, that type of material wouldn't exist. And why do people think it wasn't included in the Bible? Because you've got a strong female figure there who is obviously taking a sacerdotal position, the position of a priestess. That's why, okay, that's what they did then. That's not what we do now. So the knowledge in itself, of course, can't be gender ascribed, whatever the knowledge is. I mean, a friend of mine in the House of Lords, I think you've met him, Dr. Roger Prentice, actually took me to one side at one point and said, well, what is the knowledge? And I actually think you can answer that. But, there's a time and a place, and maybe in the middle of a cafe, that's not one of them. No, just because the church did that then, that doesn't mean the church has to do it now. What is important is, what are the ways to finding the knowledge? What are the ways to embracing the gnosis? And are you brave enough to do that in your own life? Because there will be repercussions.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if we move back, I mean, we're still going back in time a lot, but if we come forward from the Gnostics, after they were kind of squished, if you like, or at least pushed into the shadows by the mainstream faiths, we did have a resurgence of what is believed to be Gnosticism today, with the Cathars, I think, in France, and I think they went to Italy as well. I'm not sure how far they spread out, but this particular group came back in France, called the Cathars, and this was believed to be a Gnostic group. And of course, they were slaughtered, weren't they? They were, I think it was about 25,000 men, women, and children absolutely wiped off. And so that's quite horrific. And that was, I mean, that's a bit scary if that's what they did to them back then. I hope that's not what we got in store for you, David.
Well, I mean, again, one of the reasons I'm cautious about my African brothers and sisters is we're always public enemy number one. I'm not trying to steal the thunder of neo-pagans, but they're down the hit list compared to Gnostics. For some wonderful reason, we're always at the top of the hit list. I mean, where do you even start with that? I mean, Valentinus, they said he was going to be Bishop of Rome. Of course, that means Pope. He was a man. I mean, nowadays, if you try and put it in modern terms, a meditation teacher, a yoga teacher, a mystic, a practical mystic, a priest who went to Rome because people were saying, you are going to be elevated to the highest position. But of course, that's the time when money and power, the second century, is beginning to enter the Christian community in a quite poisonous way, and people could see it beginning to influence the politics of the time, the empire, and therefore he was clearly stabbed in the back metaphorically, outmaneuvered, and didn't take that position. To the man's credit, he stayed in Rome and started his own, what we would call something like a meditation and depth prayer school. And I notice his detractors didn't attack, which is interesting. And certainly it changed. I mean, the historians are right. It's changed radically after his passing. But they left him alone to do what he was going to do, and there was a certain grudging respect because it was the transition between what the church was and what it was going to become, which isn't always the best thing, unfortunately. The body of Christ has not always done what it was meant to do. Certainly, my lines are Italian. It took me a very, very long time to talking to my Italian Gnostic friends for them to convince me that this was genuine Valentinianism and not some sort of modern remake or modern rehash. I mean, they're actually reasonably well placed, some of them quite highly placed Roman Catholics. Therefore, their view is that it's a part of Roman Catholicism. I couldn't disagree with them more, by the way. And they've every right to their view, but I disagree with that. So my lines are Italian, and they're very clearly running through Italy, albeit inside the Roman Church. Yes, there are lines that run through France. I think it's a lot more complex and fragmented in France for the simple reason, as you said yourself a minute ago, yes, they were attacked by papal armies. I mean, the Cathars are our brothers and sisters. Montségur, they laid siege to it. I mean, the papal envoy at the time was approached by the leaders of the papal army and said, paraphrasing, "So we don't know what to do because it runs in all the families. We can't pick out who's a Cathar and who's not." To which this Christian-minded gentleman said, "Well, kill everybody. God will know who belongs to him." I'm paraphrasing it. I think it's actually nastier in the original. So we've always been public enemy number one. It was noticed the priests didn't murmur as they were burnt at the stakes, which unsettled everybody. They had already transcended the world in some way or other. They were at one with the cosmos. White magic, you become one with the cosmos. You don't manipulate it. You only manipulate it if you've got to. And there's maybe a subject we can talk about. So, yeah, the Cathars were an expression of the Gnostic tradition, certainly, and I think very clearly of the Christian Gnostic tradition. But, George Wood of the Theosophical Society, good chum of mine, I think he's more towards that side of it all. But, for practical reasons, I'm very much in the Italian side because I have to be. And, our wonderful friends over there are keeping an eye on all of this to see how it develops over the next couple of years. Certainly, there have been other flowerings. I mean, the Medicis, when the people you love and hate at the same time, the Medicis were trying to encourage all of this knowledge. So you have a great flowering of Italian society, and of course the Renaissance was largely fueled by Medici money and Medici power. And their motives in doing that were quite mixed. I mean, they were interested in magic of all sorts. They were interested in Gnosticism. They were interested in Hermeticism. Hermeticism possibly being a pre-Christian type of gnosis. Although it's more than likely that the Hermetic texts, the Hermetic tracts, are actually misdated, so they probably come in the 2nd and 3rd century around then. They're written in the Christian era. Though some people saying, well, no, they're copies of things, documents that were before that. I don't know. I'm not a historian. And all very interesting stuff. And Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice greatest, who was meant to be the tutor of Moses. Now, there's a job title. You've got this other current running through the court of the Medicis, the glittering court of the Medicis. And were they doing it for spiritual reasons alone? Certainly they believed in Italian culture. They believed in a rebirth of all the beauty and treasury of the Italian mindset, Italian aesthetics. But you can't help thinking, like any other group of rich people, they're also interested in power and how that could, get them what they wanted on this earth. And they made a good go of getting what they wanted on this earth. So I'm actually quite proud to be part of the Roman lineage. I mean, at a Gnostic ordination, one's Gnostic ancestors are read aloud. And as you know, I mean, I recently welcomed David Abel, who, of course, was a minister. I mean, curiously, he's got a sort of theological and actual professional history very similar to mine. So we welcomed him into the Valentinian order as a priest at Rudolf Steiner House a couple of months ago. And it was read aloud. So you do it at those times. And some of the names are very noticeable. Some of the names are very, very well known in Gnostic circles. Some of them people are more acquainted with them in cultural circles, but they're read aloud on those occasions. So haters, if you want to come and hear who's in it and who's not, just come to a Gnostic ordination. There we are. But yeah, I mean, sort of Alan, our dear friend Alan Cox became a Gnostic priest. I mean, we've always believed that study's important, but we think there are one-offs. I mean, Alan's healing gift, I don't think anybody argues with. And if they do, then they don't understand his work and they don't understand what he's doing. Certainly our dear friend Johann Alstad has been welcomed into the Valentinian Church as a priest. We've made Alison Dunlop of the ADX Files. I really strongly suggest you have her on the show, Paul. She's an amazing girl.
Yeah, I think that's long due, actually, because I appeared on her show a while back.
Yeah, and they're good. Have you listened to any?
Yes, the odd one. I mean, I've kind of I haven't been listening to as many podcasts as I should have this year, to be honest. But yeah, I have been chipping away at some of them.
You've had a lot on your plate too, I know that. Which, believe it or not, listeners, you're not going to hear. Ha 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 ha. Paul's had a lot to deal with too, and not all of it fair. So she's a deaconess with a view to becoming a priestess this year, and we've got the wonderful Harold Hermit. I'm not sure I'm allowed to give his real name, who's clearly a Valentinian clergy and will be raised to the diaconate at some time later this year. So, as I say, we've got our forthcoming chapel in Battersea. We've hired an old chapel, in Battersea High Road, for a year to see how we can develop Valentinianism further. So it's all guns blazing. I mean, my trouble, I've got lots of friends in French Gnosticism. And our dear mutual friend, Mr. Bolter, of course.
Oh, yeah.
Is a representative of Helios, which is a gathering of Gnostic groups in France. My trouble with the French scene is some of it gets very dark. And I think there are historical and cultural reasons for that. And I find it intriguing, but I'm a servant of the light. I'm not a servant of the dark. The Cathars were servants of light, not servants of the dark. And I think, maybe we all need to think, are we going along the same lines? Are we looking for the same thing? Because any search for knowledge can lead in different directions. Are you all looking for the same type of knowledge? And sometimes the answer is no. Therefore, I'm saying that not because I don't treasure my French colleagues. Tor Christophorus, if ever you listen to this, you are my true brother. But, I don't know that scene as well as the Italians, so I tend to keep my opinion to myself when it comes to French Gnosticism and let our dear Bolter talk about it, because, he goes over there and meets them all. I do know we're hoping to invite some of them across later in the year, and I'm hoping at least one or two of us can go to the next Helios meeting. That said, I do think, curiously, the TS, or they have that down as Universalist. I mean, Universalist can mean so many things. I mean, my trouble with people attacking Universalism, present company accepted, and those people defending it, is like, what bloody type of universalism do you mean? I mean, we've got to be careful of, are we all arguing about nothing half the time? And the answer is yes. We've got to tell each other what we're arguing about. Otherwise, we're not even having a proper argument. And most of the time, there shouldn't be one. I think it's to put it simply, it's like you have universalists who are spiritually involved in a deep and philosophical ideology of what's created matter and us. And then you have basically Antifa twats. That's basically to sum the two up. Yeah, I mean, look, I'm a universalist theologically. That means I think every human essence will one day be saved.
Mm,
It does not mean anything goes. There is a real difference between that.
yeah.
And even the Unitarian Church, which I was very proudly a lay minister of for many years, they don't think anything goes either. You know, maybe it's a bit more complicated than that.
I think
Uh,
it's that old thing, isn't it? Today it just seems to be really difficult to find balance because people are
yeah,
so afraid of the other side, they just
yeah,
become dogmatic. And the bottom line is, it's a case of just opening your mind to something, but then not so your brain falls out, and
yeah.
and also keeping your mind closed and being dogmatic about things that matter, but not so that you're blind. It's kind of you've got to try and find that middle ground, and
Yeah.
that's. But sorry, you carry on with what you were saying before I carry on. Sorry.
Well, we said it to each other recently. I mean, if anybody is interested, every 3 weeks I hold a Valentinian meditation circle at St. Peter's in Clapham, which is an Anglo-Catholic church. They're very kind. They very kindly let me hold an ecumenical group there. I mean, you and I were talking about it recently at the group. That we've got to talk. We've got to talk.
Mm,
This schoolboy behaviour. I'm this side of the playground, and I'm not going to your side of the playground. Bloody grow up.
mm. Well,
We've got to talk. Let me just finish this point, Paul. What the Theosophists mean, they say they're universalists. I have that down personally as a type of syncretism. I mean, I think what they're trying to do is take the Hindu bits of every religion and say that's really what they're talking about, which is fair enough. They're very good people. But what we're trying to do, us wicked Valentinians, we're actually trying to make an alliance with the Lucis Trust. Because I rather respect and like the work of Alice Bailey. I think she's definitely onto something. I noticed that most of the key spiritual figures in my life have been linked in with that somehow. And certainly the Findhorn Foundation, where I went in 1978, which shows what an old crock I am, was clearly on an initiatic level for me. And I met my own occult teacher there, Jesse Thompson, and wherever he is now, I'm grateful forever, Jesse. I mean, so we're trying to work on that basis. I think it's the job of Gnostics to not only have a knowledge about their own past, but a clear insight into the knowledge of the present world. If we're going to take a step beyond both of those things into the knowledge, which can be in any place at any time and is of this world but not of this world, because somehow it's where you recognize the mythos within yourself. And those are deep waters in anybody's book.
mm. Yeah, I mean, one of the things when I've researched Gnosticism in the past, I've been a bit confused because there seems to be. I mean, I think the overriding, the real strong tradition with it was quite Christian traditionally, in terms of it was very conservative with sexuality. It was very, in fact, I think a lot of the priests practice celibacy, and it was that sort of mindset that sex is troublesome, if you like, or either non-sex is more pure, or whatever the mindset was. But there was also some sects that were very the opposite, when they're very promiscuous with sex. Where do you go to find out the origins of these? Because that's quite a fundamental difference, isn't it?
Oh my God, are you looking for sex?
I'm always up for it, mate.
Oh my God, that is such a terrible advert.
Well, I say always, but
well, I mean, I suppose Valentinus himself had rather a Catholic view. It's all balance. Keep it in marriage. I suppose. I mean, he's not here to defend himself, is he? I suppose he's that type of view. Certainly, some groups were very influenced by the Desert Fathers. The Sangha, the monks of the desert.
yeah,
Buddhists don't, and they're not the only group. The Hindus had the Jains, the Buddhists have the Hindus have, Buddhists have the Sangha, the monks, and certainly that was really the role model of lots of Gnostic groups back in those days. Because the monks were seen as the pioneers of people exploring these higher states of consciousness, these greater states of consciousness. So they tended to be venerated in a similar way to which the Sangha or monks in Orthodoxy, Christian Orthodoxy, are still venerated, because they're living the life in the most harsh way imaginable, in the most disciplined way imaginable, in the most, there's no debate. There's no quarter. You either live it or you don't live it. So it's completely uncompromising. And that's where that comes from. I mean, if it meant you were surrounded by lots of sexually pent up people, I mean, it might have meant that. But I think modern London's that, and nobody's saying don't do anything now. So you certainly do have the schools that would have said all sexual activity should be avoided, though I doubt very much, since real life is real life, that actually happened. Whereas if you look at someone like Basilides, who claimed to be, and I believe actually was, a practicing sex magician, who believed that rather like Tantra, I think we've had everything in the West that those boys have had over there. It's just we didn't let it develop in a linear fashion. We attacked it and destroyed it. Whereas those boys in the East who never miss a trick, just let all these things evolve and develop. So, we had our sorts of Tantra too. And therefore, I think Basilides used to hold public sex orgies, but they were magical ceremonies. He just said, no, go for it, and let's overcome the world that way. I mean, they had very serious intentions behind what they were doing. Basilides would have had that sort of view that, there's nothing wrong with a bit of a giggle, but actually these are magical practices. So you have both views represented in the West exactly as you do in the East. But as I say, sadly, because of the type of politics we have in this type of the world, these schools, these practices, these movements were not left at peace. They were part of the whole political discourse of their day, whether they liked it or not, and were either persecuted or made center stage and treasured or pushed out of history to come back a couple of centuries later. I mean, one look at Orthodox monasticism gives you a very clear idea of how the West treats its mystics, which is really all over the place. These are people, male and female, who deserve our respect for the simple fact that they're trying to take steps ahead of all of us into the sorts of things we can't do with our busy lives. And that's why they're worthy of that type of respect. But abstinence, balance, and filling your boots were all represented in the different schools.
Right. Yeah. Well, there's one more point I wanna touch on before we call it a day, and that is, I mean, I've spoken, as we mentioned earlier, that Gnosticism it's got so much mystique to it, and that there are sort of crossovers for stuff that existed a long time before certain pagan faiths. You can find this familiarity of it all, which leaves people to believe, like me, although I'm not a historian, but I have a view that I think it's likely that such spirituality was responsible for the pagan faiths all around, and which are also very nature orientated as well, which is why they're a bit more, you get more folkish kind of pagan faiths, which is all relevant for what they are. But like a lot of heathens, for example, would look at Gnosticism, and because we're talking about a demiurge god that has created this world in error, which is meant to be a bad world, meant to be a prison world that we meant to spiritually climb out of in order to get to the real world. A lot of people look at that as a negative thing. Is it, what does that mean, that we're basically, our reality at the moment is a mistake and it was really negative? I mean, my personal view there is that, well, yeah, okay, but we already know that anyway. I mean, no one finishes in this world in a particularly great way. We get old, we die, and it's kind of like we bow out usually not in the best fashion, not in the best of times of our lives, and we can easily address real horror and negativity here. So we already know that. The question is why do we create the good stuff, and what does that good stuff mimic? So for me, the good stuff in this world is like a painting of the real world. So it's like it's that's what's coming anyway. So do you know what I mean? It's kind of,
yeah.
How do you view, because it's like what they say, you could have a really pessimistic view of reality with the Gnostic ideology, or it can be used as a springboard for optimism. And that's what I would say to the heathens that are interested in studying Gnosticism and seeing if there's any crossovers, which I think there is, because I think that Surt, for example, is a flamed being, which the description of him is quite like the Archons, which are described as flames. So he could have been an Archon that started the whole Norse world and us as a people that was the spark of us as European folk, But yeah, sorry, I'm yabbering on. What is your view on that ideology as such, and where you find optimism in basically this is kind of like hell according to some Gnostics?
Certainly, this is hell according to some Gnostics. I don't believe that. I've got to say one thing to our detractors, Paul. I don't know how much you and I agree on, but that's not important. Our friendship's the important thing. And I think the fact we're both attacked, sometimes we're attacked for knowing each other. Have you noticed that?
Absolutely. Yeah,
it's so immature. I can't even comment on it, I wanted to say that because it links in with my time exploring the heathen tradition.
Yeah.
I explored heathenry and Wicca. I'm very, very proud of both. I'm exceedingly proud of my days in heathenry. My trouble with a lot of modern heathenry is it forgets that it's a part of the much longer Indo-Germanic tradition. It's the Indo-Germanic tradition in this part of the world. Certainly, if you want to get to the gods, you have to go up a rainbow bridge. I mean, so already you're talking about maybe what was a type of gnosis, Gnostic practice, Gnostic meditation amongst the priesthood, amongst the Godies. I think you're looking at something like that there. Certainly, Alice Bailey talks about the rainbow bridges leading to higher states of consciousness, and there are rainbow bridges that lead to rainbow bridges. So, I think that's very, very telling. Also, you've got this mysterious emptiness, the Gununga gap, which isn't empty. It's empty, not empty. It's empty, not empty. These are deep and powerful things, and I sense the presence of Gnosticism in all of that somewhere. And certainly the Surt, the fire demon, who of course uses his flaming sword to such terrible effect during Ragnarok. There's something going on, there's something going on, there's something going on. Because of course Balder is the god of light, the radiant one, is the only one to be reborn into their next world. This is Gnosticism.
Yeah.
There's a real danger for me, and in where I am at the moment, let alone heathenry, of taking nature at face value. Nature is profound and beautiful and rough and cruel and good and amazing. It doesn't need to be pampered. It doesn't need to be, I like hugging trees with the best of them, but I'm perfectly aware that, it's more complex than that. The nature that right, let's put it this way, the sacred lands where our ancestors are buried are sacred, and that never changes, but also on different levels, there's streams of electromagnetic energies. What the quantum physicists say is also true at the same time, that they're burial grounds for our ancestors. We mustn't limit what's in front of us. And that's why I like the Valentinian concept of the deep. You can look at Gnosticism as something higher and above us. But you can, in the Valentinian tradition, you could equally say, well, no, it's inside us, it's immanent. And you can go infinitely deeply into these things. So it's not my place to say if I've got trouble with heathenry or not. And I still find it invigorating. I still find it very, very, very stimulating as a thought stream, as a tradition. But I think the real danger, if I may be allowed to say something from the outside, is that it tends to limit what nature actually is, which is a shame, because that's certainly not what our ancestors would have done. And a Godi wouldn't have been like an Anglican priest with a dogma in his mind, teaching his parishioners to believe that or you'll go to hell. Godis were exceptional people thinking outside the box and doing extraordinary things. That's why they were Godis. And believe this, my child, that's a Christian thought, that's not a heathen thought. But it doesn't mean they're not Godis with their own views and with their own religious sentiments. It just, they didn't have, it wasn't like that then. So I sense the Gnostic imprint, I sense the Gnostic expression absolutely everywhere, and certainly we need to recover it as far as we can everywhere as this world takes some very challenging steps, particularly ecologically, over the next couple of days. I don't know these days what you think about the ecological problems of the world, even if they're massively exaggerated, we need to respect nature a bit more. And I know we both agree on that.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
We need to be more mindful of what we're doing to our mother, the earth. I mean, that's where, again, I know you and I get taken in error. I mean, people have you down as someone that's just, no, there's no ecological problem. Well, I know you think there's a lot more going on than that.
Well, yeah, I think it's basically, the main thing that gets me, and I had this when I was in with the Wiccan community, and it kind of exists in the whole neo-pagan thing, is the attitude is we need to look after the earth because we're killing it or we're hurting it. Or when you step back and you think that's actually, there's almost a sense of arrogance to that. It's as if we can hurt the earth. The earth could just brush us off in a sneeze. We're not, and it will regrow everything it wants to regrow. It will start up new life. It had the dinosaurs. The dinosaurs went. It had us. And when it's ready for something else, it'll have something else. Where I think we have got to pay attention to is our homes. For us, it's not about the earth. The earth takes care of itself. The earth will do what it needs to do to survive. We're talking about our environment, our air that we breathe, the animals around us, our societies. We need to. So I've got that. There's definitely no problem. That's common sense. We've got to look after our air. We've got to look after our food, and that side of it. But this whole, we're going to destroy the planet. That's where I start to become skeptical.
Well, as I said, you have every right to. But I don't know why people don't listen to you. I mean, sometimes they don't, and that's just unfair. I know we're both concerned about ecology, and therefore, listeners, take that on board and chew on it. We both are.
Yeah.
And that's just taken as read. But let me say to the neo-pagans listening, if anybody from that community is listening, let me say to the heathen community, respect for nature has always been a part of our traditions, even if you're a world rejecter, which some of them were. Some of the Gnostics were not part of my tradition, because you respect it as an emanation from something. Remember, Sophia was folded into the earth by accident. She is there. She's in the cosmos. She's in living and growing things. Therefore, it's to our advantage to remember that and help her transcendence as much as our own.
Yeah. No, that's I think that's a good place to round it off. Unless you've got anything else you'd like to add to this, because it's been really enjoyable. That's why I like to bring this subject up, and I urge listeners to research more of this stuff. It's endless. We could have gone on for another hour, to be honest. There's a lot more notes I've got here. But anything else, David?
Well, you've got an exhausted David on your hands tonight. I need to mention an event we're putting on the 11th of October at the Royal Society of Arts, TEDx Lambeth. You, of course, are a team member. Yeah, I will be speaking about conceptualist arts. Apparently, under the rules of TED, you're not allowed to talk about religion or politics. That's 99% of what I want to talk about out the window, what I normally talk about. So I'll be talking about conceptual art. There's quite a glittering lineup of people. There are 2 intermissions, one for networking, one for food, reasonably priced tickets, international speakers. What more do you want? Take the shirts from our back. The young impresario stroke prodigy Daniel Hardy Irandust is the curator. There are times for networking. 3 MPs are turning up. The Mayor of Lambeth. You've got Solby Fanar, Andrew Ray, Jerry Skeens. You've got poetry. You've got performance. You've got Katie Day, who's talking fascinatingly, actually, about menopause in the workplace. It's one of those issues that's just dusted under the carpet, but actually, of course, it's very, very important and very, very interesting. Dancers from Central Asia in full costume, maybe dancers from India. My God, what an afternoon. And you can even meet that Paul Obertelli.
Yeah, no, it's going to be a great event.
Plug.
Yeah, no, it'd be great. There'll be lots of folks from the THA community, if you like, there. And it's, so it'll be great to meet some of you out there, listeners, if you get tickets. It's got a very, very diverse lineup of speakers speaking about different things and stuff. And it should be a good day. And one of the cool things is obviously it finishes in time that we can all go to the pub afterwards and have a beer or a coffee if you're that way inclined, or a soy milk coffee if you're that way inclined.
Well, I mean, we might actually go for a proper proper meal. I don't know yet.
We could all, that would be that. If there's a few people, we'll go to a big banquet afterwards.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if they want the cheap tickets, they've got to bloody order them quickly because we're selling out.
Yeah.
But no, come and meet us. Come and meet us if you want to biff Paul Obertelli or me. Put your money where your mouth is and meet us on the 11th of October at the Royal Society of Arts, 1:30 to 5 p.m.
No milkshakes though.
No milkshakes. No. Yeah, I think that's, apart from the fact that's rude. I mean, where does it stop? I mean, what did you say to me on Sunday? Stones are next, then.
Yeah, well, that's it.
This childish nonsense really has to stop.
It's psychological.
And we must start talking.
Yeah. It's well, you know me. I think for the last 3 years, and I'm going to throw this out. For the last 3 years, we've heard nothing but second referendum, this and that and that. Throughout the whole of this EU campaign thing, all we've heard about is finances and milkshakes, and it's a bit of a letdown, to be honest.
Well, let's shock everyone. I mean, not only am I a libertarian, I'm a card-carrying member of the party. I'm also a Remainer. Oh my God! And he knows Paul Obertelli is a good friend. That's because we're adults, you see. That's because we're adults.
We can have our disagreements.
We have our disagreements, and we're adults, and we're good friends. What did I'm going to say, I told you so. What did I say to you at the beginning? This has absolutely nothing to do with freedom. It's all to do with people sizing up bank accounts.
That's right, yeah. And
I hate the fact I've been proved right, but hey, I've been proved right.
Well, it's going to be interesting where it goes from here, put it that way. It's actually got to the point where it is almost impossible to predict what's going to happen next, to be honest.
Because they're rapidly losing control of a monster they created because they don't know what to do because it's all about finance.
That's right.
And it's an absolute disgrace. Isn't there one politician in this country that can think about the nation and not themselves?
Yeah.
Don't answer that.
Well, okay, that's where we're going to wrap it up anyway. We've had our little political spat there at the end, which we always have to get in on this show. But that's it. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Hope you enjoyed this one. Any questions you've got regarding this Gnosticism subject and anything you'd like that you think anyone can add to it, because obviously there is an awful lot you can add to it, we'll be really happy to hear from you. Until the next time, take care. Bye.
Chelsea.